So now we have me talking. I'm Hugh Newman, in case any of you don't know who I am. Stop the booing, please. And today I'm really continuing on from Steve's brilliant talk, but looking at the worldwide aspect of stone circles. Now this is one of the key subjects, obviously, as a megalithomaniac. And I've just become more and more interested and been researching just stone circles. And then I realized the more you look around the world, the more you find evidence of them. And so we're going to take a look at some from various different parts of the world. This is some of the stuff, the strange stuff I've been getting up to. I've recently published a book about giants, this one here, with my colleague and friend Jim Vieira, which really stemmed from megalithic sites I was looking at in New England. I've also got the Earth Grids book out, with the wonderful wooden books. Been involved in quite an odd TV thing called Ancient Aliens, and amongst other things. And as we saw at the very start of the conference, as we mentioned in the introduction, John Michel has been a very big influence to many of us, myself, John Martineau, Steve Marshall, many of us. So it really is dedicated to him, this whole conference, of course. But with the stone circles, there's quite a few unusual anomalies we're finding, not just with well-known circles, but also very little-known circles, even circles that have been completely lost over time. Here's just some of the subjects we're going to drift through in the next hour, looking at some aspects of Aubrey and Stonehenge that have been intriguing me. Just a little intro for a couple of minutes about some of Alexander Thom's brilliant geometries. The ley lines, even giants connected with them. But when we go global, we'll see that it really is a worldwide phenomenon, although many of these stone circles are in a slightly different form to what we're used to here. Then we're going to sort of briefly, as we go through it, look at who could have built them and why. Now, Stonehenge is obviously the most famous stone circle in the world. This is going to be looked at more carefully later on with the wonderful Julian Richards, who's going to be doing a talk about Stonehenge, the story so far. This is a painting from 1790, but what intrigues me about this place is the dating of it, because it stretches much, much further back than people realise. Some of the earliest aspects of it, the post holes that used to be blobs of paint in the car park, that are now, they put stumps there, were at least 10,000 years old. And so if that's the case, and we know that Stonehenge was officially built around 2600, 2200 BC, then there's a multi-thousand year period of activity around Stonehenge and the Amesbury landscape. And this really gets me. And we can look at, some of the other dating of some other stone circles around the world that stretch back to roughly that time and even slightly beyond. We have, obviously, Gobekli Tepe. There's very controversial dating with this site in southeast Turkey. This has been talked about over the years at Megalithomania. Then that was, about 1,500 or possibly more years older than the wooden post holes that were put in at Stonehenge around 8,000 BC. Then we have these other sites going from 6,900 BC all the way up to 2,300 BC. Atlit Yam in Israel, in Portugal, Carahunge in Armenia, Nabta Playa in Egypt, Zagra Circle in Malta, Newgrange, which really was a stone circle surrounding the main site there, Msoura in Morocco. Different parts of Stonehenge get built at different parts. Some are below, which is a recumbent stone circle. Mary Maidens and the Rollright stones. We're just going to look at a few of these. I just want to, we've only got like an hour or less to get through here, but there's some really just interesting anomalies here. For example, even though we know the post holes go back 10,000 years or to 8,000 BC, these are what is now thought to be the rough dating of the different aspects of Stonehenge, starting at 3,250 BC, which is at least 1,000 years older than has been put out there officially for many years. Even the Aubrey holes are much older, and the bluestone semicircle dates back to potentially 2,950 BC. We'll have a quick look in a moment at some other sites that have been found more recently in the Stonehenge landscape, which date to roughly this time. Another bluestone circle where the stones actually came from Wales as well, down by the river, and at the start of the avenue that leads from the river all the way over to Stonehenge. This is the earliest depiction of Stonehenge. This is supposed to be Merlin here, getting a giant to lift the lintels into place. Now, this was first written about by Geoffrey of Monmouth in the History of the Kings of Britain. And soon after, this illustration by Wace was published. And this is actually the first ever depiction of Stonehenge on record. And I'm absolutely delighted because it has a giant in it. And I've just written a book about giants, so I'm delighted by that. It's famous for the solstice, the summer solstice sunrise, which also aligns with the avenue, which is now being properly scanned, and the location of it has been accurately surveyed, and it goes around kind of in a strange shape all the way down to the river. These are the post holes from a few years ago. Now, as you know, unless you haven't been there for a few years, Stonehenge landscape has completely changed because they built a new visitor centre, which is very nice, by the way. And but they've kind of destroyed and covered up this whole car park. They put wooden stumps where these three wooden holes were. But it is actually thought that there were maybe 5 of these, and not just 3. So there is debate about that. And they could have been extremely large totem pole type things, or they could have been stumps. Whatever they were, they marked the location of Stonehenge 10,000 years ago. So someone marked that spot, and then later, thousands of years later, it became revered and was then built upon, and this is what we see, what's left of it today. More dating from that era has been found just east of Stonehenge, and you can just see this is some excavations that took place 1.5 miles east of the monument, and this puts it in, there's basically evidence of occupation there, and other things, post holes and other things, to the same era as the post holes that were in the car park. So there was serious activity there going that far back. We also have these pits that are in part of the cursus, which really intrigue me. And this is the heel stone here, and there's these pits here which strangely from the heel stone align to the summer solstice sunrise and sunset circa 3500 BC, and there is carbon dating stretching that far back before most of the stone circle was built. So there is some strange anomalies that keep occurring. Obviously this is the famous shot of the sunrise on the summer solstice, but apparently there's some debate as to whether there were 2 heel stones, and the sun would rise in between them, and that gap between them marked the edges of the avenue, and also the sun over a period of time would rise at different parts within that space between the 2 heel stones. This really interests me. This is what is called Bluehenge, even though you can't really see any of it today. But we have main Stonehenge here, the main Stonehenge. So this is actually from the Daily Mail, so I should credit those, I guess. And this is the avenue, which has now been photographed and can be seen. And it goes all the way around here, past these famous king barrows here, all the way down to the river. And this is where a bluestone circle is thought to have been built at one of the earliest stages of the main construction there. And clearly these are the stones that came from the Preseli Mountains in Wales. And there's supposed to be 27 stones, which is an interesting astronomical number. And you can see an artist's representation of what they got up to here, all this kind of stuff, which tends to be represented like that in the media. Also in the landscape, other things have been discovered. Again, thank you, Daily Mail. We have a woodhenge that is just slightly northwest of the main part of Stonehenge here, which has been found here. And this is where the Bluehenge site is here. We have the famous woodhenge we all know about up here. And so more is being discovered the more we look. And this is part of a LiDAR scan, which shows it in more detail. And Vince Gaffney, the archaeologist who's been doing this surveying of the landscape, so it's completely transformed the way they look at this area now. It's completely different to what is expected from that part of the landscape. And from that, they got very accurate measurements, and they found that the relationship between the outer henge at Stonehenge and the nearby mound, which is you can still go and climb upon when you go to Stonehenge, is a difference between the dimension of the moon and the dimension of the Earth, which I find particularly interesting, especially when we look at John Michel's work on this and Michael Schneider, who have been looking at the same principle of squaring the circle with with the Earth and the moon, is encoded within the Stonehenge site itself. So I find this completely remarkable. There's all these anomalies that just most people really don't know about, and it certainly isn't represented in the archaeological record. These are very interesting. These are like axe heads carved into one of the main, two of the main stones at Stonehenge. And actually, I was at the spring equinox celebration, or it might be the autumn equinox celebration in 2014, and I bumped into Julian Richards, and we had a little chat. I managed to film him, and he took me over and showed me exactly where these were, even though you can only see one or two of them now with the naked eye. But I managed to get him on video, and he admitted on video he was a megalithomaniac. So I was delighted by that, and immediately I invited him to Megalithomania. And these are some of the theories about these particular carvings on the stones, that they could represent the stars of Scorpio and Sagittarius and other ones. But this is speculative at the moment, but interesting nonetheless. Then we have the famous lunation triangle, rediscovered or discovered by Robin Heath, which links Stonehenge and the Bluestone site in Wales, where the stones come from, and Lundy Island. And this is 2,500 times larger than the Four Station Stones area within Stonehenge itself. This is one photo of some of the Bluestone site. This is the very area where many of the stones come from, but they come from various parts of Preseli, not just this particular part. The stone circles also link up. This again is the work of Robin Heath. So we have the lunation triangle here, which is a 5, 12, 13 triangle, but we also have a 3, 4, 5 Pythagorean triangle linking up other megalithic sites. Stone circles in particular are below this site in Wales, and even on Lundy we actually found something there with Robin Heath and the lay hunters a few years ago. This just shows you a more detailed version of that particular 3, 4, 5 triangle, which is being represented in Robin's latest books. And then we have the wonderful Peter Knight. He's just walked in the door, I think. And this again links Stonehenge, and this is actually the alignment of the lunation triangle, and so is this. Just going along the Stonehenge to Glastonbury and the Stonehenge to Brockley. That is the same as the lunation triangle. And I highly recommend Peter's wonderful book, The Wessex Asteroom, where he talks about this in great detail. And this, again, this just shows you all the way around the world. If you extend this particular line, it goes all the way around the world to some very important sites, such as Delphi, Giza, Mecca, all the way around to America through Serpent Mound, through Carrowmore and Carrowkeel in Ireland, and then back over to Britain, to Preseli, and then back to Stonehenge. It just shows you it in more detail, close up. But we went to Lundy back in 2008. It was part of a lay hunters get-together. Robin Heath was there, my friend and colleague Stuart Mason, and we were experimenting. We were making lunation triangles in the landscape, and we actually found what appeared to be a lost stone circle on Lundy Island. This is us surveying. Here is me with a slightly different haircut, and this is Robin surveying. We're taking notes and helping him do it. And this is what Robin basically discovered on Lundy Island, very close to the point of the corner, the elbow of the Great Lunation Triangle. And it's a Lundy egg, and this is an egg as in the work of Alexander Thom. So many of these stones are buried deep in the ground, and so you can really not see them. They're just, a few of them are popping out of the ground, and we managed to get a survey done with a proper theodolite. And this is what he came up with. And yeah, this just shows you where Lundy Island is in comparison. Also on Lundy Island, there's some 5th century burials close to this spot, and these stones mark where they are. But interestingly, an 8-foot 5-inch skeleton was also found at that particular burial as well. Another report talks about an 8-foot 2-inch skeleton also found on Lundy Island. So whether these were super ancient and were involved in the megalithic construction, whether they were indeed 5th century people who just happened to be over 8 feet tall, we don't know, but perhaps they could be connected with Stonehenge, because there are quite a few giants have reportedly been found in the burial mounds around the Stonehenge landscape. This is one example here of 9 foot 4 inches, which was found near Salisbury in a mound just north of St Edmund's churchyard. This one was 9 feet 2 inches, and also near Salisbury again, a skeleton which measured 14 feet 10 inches in length was reported back in 1802. I don't know how you can come up with that unless you saw something quite remarkable, unless he was a total liar. But I can't imagine he was. So this is some intriguing anomalies. And we have this as well, a skeleton of large dimensions in a remarkable barrow on the verge of Wiltshire on the road leading from Salisbury to Blandford. This was recorded in 1813. So we're going to jump over to Stanton Drew. This is another fascinating triple stone circle. Not too far from here. We often go there on the tours. The main circle is around 370 feet in diameter. And the other ones, you see the smaller ones here, the Great Circle there, and another one over here. And we also have the cove back here, which is like an outlier stone. But what's interesting about this is that English Heritage in 1997 did a survey, a geophysical survey of the site, and found concentric circles within the main stone circle. And they realized this was most likely wooden posts. And this is an artist's representation of what that would have looked like. This is from the wonderful documentary Standing with Stones by Michael Bott. So it's worth checking out. They did a brilliant reconstruction of actually walking through it. And these circles were probably first noted by the famous antiquarian John Aubrey in 1664, but the first survey was in 1776 by William Stukeley. There's a rich tradition of folklore associated with Stanton Drew. The most persistent one is that the stones are the petrified members of a wedding party and its musicians, lured by the devil to celebrate on the Sabbath, and thus being punished for their revels and turned to stone. And the stones are what is left of that. Here's just some aerial shots I took just a few days ago of Stanton Drew. Just so you can get an overview. There's really not many stones left there. And so this is the small circle, and we're just sort of in the distance over on the left are the main circles there. But it's these concentric rings that really fascinate me, because it's very similar to what we find at Woodhenge. You get the same kind of system within the main circle there. Again, it's not clear whether these concentric timber posts, there was a roof structure, or whether they were low. No one's really sure about that. But it does show you that there was something quite profound going on at Stanton Drew, going back many, many thousands of years. This just shows you, again, this is just a small stone circle. Just sort of zooming in just to get sort of feel for it. Then we're going to go to the main one in a moment. Anyone been to Stanton Drew here? Quite a few of you. Yeah, I do recommend it. I mean, we're not doing it as a part of the tour this year, but we often do because it is such an incredible site. And there's a wonderful wooden book written about Stanton Drew. I highly recommend that as well. This just shows you the main stone circle here, going over to the small stone circle. There's a few scattered ones here which they think could have been part of an avenue connecting them up. But yeah, that just gives you a quick overview of the site. Obviously, we've heard about Avebury in detail, thanks to Steve Marshall. We have to mention this because it's the ultimate, really, stone circle in Britain. It's potentially the biggest stone circle in the world, although there's debate now because of Msoura in Morocco, which could be slightly larger, which we'll have a look at shortly. But just to give you an idea of the size, I mean, Stonehenge would easily fit in one of these. This is Stukeley's drawing of what he believed it would have looked like, although it's quite fanciful because these are more zigzag, these avenues. This is Nicholas Mann's wonderful Photoshop rendition of what Avebury once looked like, and the whole ditch could well have been chalk, and this could be connected again with the waterways and things that Steve Marshall was talking about. Here's another image which is just quite fantastic, again from Nicholas Mann. And this is just when we were there a few years ago on one of the Megalithomania tours with Robin Heath, Jeff Stray, Matt, Kate, many others, Howard Crowhurst, Ian, who's not with us today, unfortunately. and a few others. You might recognize some of those people. So this is the Avebury inner circle, as in the stone circle. This is actually Alexander Thom's plan of Avebury, which proved to be rather complicated. And it did show some interesting anomalies here. This was developed by John Smoot, and he kind of he found slightly different geometries into Alexander Thom. These are the two overlaid. I'm not going to go too much into this right now. There's been some other discoveries made again, which are in the small wooden book about Avebury. What's interesting to me, though, is that back in 1937, someone called A. Keeler found 3 unrecorded stone holes 11 meters apart on the arc of the circle, which were basically what he thinks is that on where this northern part of the circle is here, there was actually another stone circle there. And so there's like potentially even 3 stone circles here. These are the 2 in the middle. This is another one which would have sort of gone over the ditch or the henge there. So I find that particularly interesting. And this was recorded, this was put out there, and he seriously believed that could well have been another stone circle within Avebury, which has never been recorded. It just got mentioned in 1937. So if that's the case, I don't know, but I'd love to see some proper scanning and archaeology done to prove that one way or the other. Alexander Thom, he's been talked about a lot at the conferences over the years. He was a legendary archaeoastronomer and worked on the geometry and metrology of these stone circles. And he was a professor of engineering at Oxford University, and he surveyed something like 300 stone circles around Britain, and there's just under 1,000 recorded ones, and came up with some remarkable results, which were published in several books in the 1960s and early 70s. It wasn't really accepted by academia at the time and pretty much got ridiculed at the time, but around 20 or 30 years later, his research was taken up and put back into the spotlight, and now it gets the credit it deserves. He discovered the famous megalithic yard, 2.72 feet, which is debated by various ancient metrologists such as John Neal, and many different types of stone circles. One of the geometries he liked was the flattened A. This is an example at Castle Rig, and you could just briefly see the construction techniques that you would need to do from within the circle. Here, this is an aerial shot of Castle Rig, just to show you that strange shape. Long Meg and her daughters, which is nearby in Cumbria. This is the flattened B type stone circle, again surveyed by Alexander Thom. And this is that shape, very similar, but slight variations which give the difference. There's some beautiful carvings actually at Long Meg here. This is just some spiral carvings, which we find all over the place, literally all over Britain, potentially all over the world as well. It's almost like a signature of the megalith builders. We even find it on the Towie stone, the one in the middle here, which is a stone sphere found up in northern Scotland, in Aberdeenshire. Now, this is just one aspect. I'm not going to go into it here, but this is one aspect of these megalithic sites, especially up in Scotland, where we find over 400 of these stone spheres, often with quite complicated geometric shapes, incorporate Archimedean and Platonic solids, were found in relationship to stone circles. And even some were found more recently up in Orkney. So I find this absolutely fascinating, and more research needs to be done on this. But the gentleman who did the best research on this, in my opinion, is Keith Critchlow in his wonderful book, Time Stands Still. And he decoded, here's just 5 examples which are very close to the Platonic solids here. And he decoded them, worked on the geometries, and concluded that there was a very advanced group of people who were working with spherical geometry going back at least to 3000 BC or beyond. So this is Glen Quicken Circle. I'm just going through some interesting random sites here. This is up in Scotland. And Aubrey Burle claimed this was the finest of all centre stone circles, i.e. one with a stone in the middle of it. And interestingly, actually within this stone circle, or nearby to it, was excavated in the 1800s the bones of a man of uncommon size. So we do find these giants popping up all over the place. This is a very beautiful circle. I was in Northern Ireland with James Swagger just recently, and this is called Beltany Stone Circle. And it's actually more of a cairn, more of a chamber that's been destroyed slightly, and all the stones within it have been used to build the walls nearby. But it is a really stunning site. We managed to get there at sunset. But this is potentially dated from around 1400 BC, so it's a fairly late stone circle. Potentially it's got 64 stones, but it could have more. One of the stones is decorated with cut marks. Although there is debate, there could have been 80 stones within the circle. And the Beltane, the name links it with Beltane, obviously, which we're kind of pretty much on now, well, a few days ago. And it does seem to have a Beltane sunset alignment with some of the key stones in the site. So this is just a very beautiful site, and if you ever get up to Northern Ireland, you really should check this out. It's not too far from Derry. It's a stunning part of the megalithic landscape of Britain, and it's well worth a visit. While I was up there, I visited another site. This is a Bigmore stone circle, and it's like a multiple stone circle. They're very small stones. They're not really megalithic as such, but this was only rediscovered in the 1940s. And it consists of 7 stone circles, and there's rings, stone rings and cairns and stone rows, all associated and built in to the complex. It's not just stone circles on their own. There is evidence of Neolithic occupation and even agriculture going back to when these were being built. But the peat over time kind of filled in and covered up, and there's potentially many more structures here in this particular area. And there's a whole complex of megalithic chambers, dolmens, standing stones, and other sites, all within a few miles of this particular spot. But you can just see the kind of interesting shapes with the avenues and the cairns and the circles here. It really is a beautiful site. Again, we managed to get there at sunset and get some aerial shots of this with our fun little drone we have. This just shows you it here. I'm just going to gaze at this because it's a lovely shot. But again, this is really beautiful, and it's well worth a visit, and it's literally only been discovered back in the 1940s. So we're going to explore a little bit now and go around the world and look at some sites here. This one on the left here, this is Silistani in Peru. This is in Libya. This is in Armenia. This is up in the Lake District, actually. This is in Argentina. So we'll just have a look at some of these again. This is some of the dating again and some of the sites we're going to be looking at. But I think one of the most important sites that's been discovered in recent years is in southeast Turkey, near the town of Sanliurfa, or Urfa. This is Gobekli Tepe, and this dates to at least 9,500 BC. Rediscovered less than 20 years ago by Klaus Schmidt, who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago. And it consists of multiple stone circles with these strange T-shaped pillars with these really intricate carvings on of various animals, birds, reptiles, and anamorph kind of figures. It's a very unusual design. They don't sit deep in the ground. They kind of rest on the bedrock, which has been carved flat in these little dips. And somehow they managed to balance them there, or they had some structure or stones or a small wall between them to keep them upright. So there's been some fantastic books written about it, most notably Andrew Collins' Gobekli Tepe, Genesis of the Gods. And he goes into detail about the different alignments at the site, relating to Cygnus mainly. This is one of the stones here. This is the vulture stone. And you can just see the beautiful detail on it with the scorpion, different figures, these strange kind of bags which we find on many ancient sites around the world, many in Sumeria, Babylon, even in Mexico, in the Olmec lands, you find these strange bags these people seem to be carrying. And again, we find it represented here at Gobekli Tepe. This is an artist's impression, probably the Daily Mail again, of it aligning to Sirius, but there's debate about this because Rodney Hale and Andrew Collins did some work on this and found that Sirius would not have even been visible at 9,500 BC, and hence the Cygnus connection is much more reliable according to their archaeoastronomical research. This is an interesting submerged stone circle site off the coast of Israel. It's a semicircle. The stones were less than a ton each, but they have cut marks on them, which is very interesting, which we find at various places around the world, including Britain. But it dates to 6,900 BC to 6,300 BC. And not too much is known about this particular site right now. There's still work being done on it because it's deep under the water, so it's quite hard to get to. But this just shows you a close-up of that particular site. But this is really an anomaly. I mean, in Israel, you do have the Golan Heights, which isn't really a stone circle. It's like stone walls with little dolmens in it, built in this huge circular structure. But we know that dates back to at least this era, if not before. But a similar era to that, we find sites in Portugal go this far back as well, to at least 6,000 BC. This is Almendras. I visited here a few years ago. And this just shows you, these are actually called Cromlechs. These aren't called stone circles in Portugal. But these are the different shapes and sizes. This is the first stage, then it got built into this. And over time, it kind of got ruined and the stones got knocked around through the different weather and things like this. But it goes back to 6,000 BC, which is particularly ancient when it comes to these types of structures. This just shows you some shots of it. And how beautiful, they're kind of curved, almost egg-shaped stones that are buried here. There's many sites in this part of Portugal, all around a town called Évora. And there's a friend of mine, Mario, who runs tours, and he's an archaeologist, and it's EvoraMegalithica.com, I think is the website. And you can check out, and he will take you around the sites. The largest dolmen in the world is in this area, and there's some really off-the-beaten-track sites as well, which are well worth a visit. It's a beautiful area. This is Carahunge in Armenia. This is a very controversial site with rather extreme dating going on with this one as well, potentially the same era as the ones in Portugal and in Israel. Clive Ruggles is an archaeoastronomer, not liked by many people, but he did some work on that and found it did have astronomical alignments associated with it, particularly with these holes that were carved into the stones. There's another shot of it here. Very interesting site. I've not had a chance to visit this one myself, so I can't comment on it too much, but more research is currently being carried out. We have a very small stone circle in the very southern tip of Egypt, on the Tropic of Cancer. And Robert Breval and Thomas Brophy have done some research on this and published a book about it. These were just sitting around in the sand, really, and they were so small, you get like vandals going there and driving the trucks around and destroying. They basically destroyed Nabta Playa when it got rediscovered. But they've reconstructed it at the museum in Aswan, so you can go and take a look for yourself. But again, the dating of this is pretty extreme. It's at least 6,000, 7,000, maybe 8,000 years old, apparently, which is some of the oldest structures known in Egypt, predating the pyramids and other sites by a very long way. And he's just like, before it got destroyed, I think, shows you what it would have looked like. And there was an interesting shaped stone that appears next to it, which looked like the shape of a cow or even a bull, which they think could be related to Taurus, which we see at some other sites around the world, but it's beyond the scope of this talk to go into that right now. It was Robert Temple who introduced me to some of these old photos. It really intrigued me. He spoke at Megalithomania in 2009 and in 2011, I think. And these are some sites in Libya which look just like the trilithons we find at Stonehenge. So it's really intrigued me. And if it wasn't for Robert, I wouldn't have known about these. But I managed to find the old photos, and the similarities are quite remarkable. You can see more here. So whether these were part of the Phoenicians who we know were traveling around the Mediterranean and along the Iberian Peninsula, we don't know. So they could be quite late, they could be extremely ancient. There's really not been too much work done on it, but here's just some of the more intricate designs here from this particular area. And yeah, these are worth investigating. I'd love to go to Libya, but it might be a little bit dangerous there, I'm not sure. Has anyone been to Libya here? Oh, of course Louis has, yes. Excellent. And so this is another stone circle site in Libya, which intrigued me, because the other trilithons weren't particularly necessarily part of a stone circle, but they do resemble the trilithons at Stonehenge. So here's just some information about this. I'm not going to go into detail about this, but there was, it's been recorded a very long time ago that there was a megalithic culture in that part of Libya. Msoura, Morocco. This is another very interesting site. Again, Robert Temple did some excellent work on this in his book, Egyptian Dawn. I'm planning on visiting here this year because this is technically, if it is really a stone circle or whether it's actually more of a chamber, similar to what we have at Beltany in Northern Ireland. We're really not sure, but it just seemed like there was a mound there originally which got heavily excavated, partly destroyed, unfortunately. But this is what's left of it. This is the very large stone here, and then it goes obviously around in a circle. You can see the size of it. It's quite remarkable. And this is bigger than Avebury. This is bigger than the main Avebury circle. It has a slight ellipse geometry. There are 30 circles like this in Britain. And apparently it uses a megalithic yard, and it's astronomically aligned. And legend states that it was the mound was erected around 3000 BC for the grave of a Mauritius king. This is what the legend states. So it could be that old, which would put it contemporary with sites such as Stonehenge and others. Here's just an old map of it, which shows the tumulus within the circle. And obviously every one of these dots here is a stone around the edge. Here's one of the old photographs of when it was being excavated. And you can see it's been very badly destroyed. But even if this was a mound or a tumulus within a stone circle outer ring, it's still an incredibly remarkable site and well worth noting as a very important stone circle in this survey we're having a look at around the world. This just shows you some of the edge stones here. And these were quite finely cut stones next to the rough-hewn blocks. This would have been like sort of part of the building construction of the tumulus inside it. There's also this very, very ancient circle, which is at least about the same time as Msoura, about 3000 BC to around 2400 BC. It's called the Shara or Zagra circle. This is just near Gigantia in Gozo, one of the Maltese islands. It's been destroyed pretty much. There's nothing left of it really. It's just, and it was the strange thing about this one is that it was like an underground stone circle. It was almost like a hypogeum, not the hypogeum we find in Malta, but a hypogeum where it was an underground temple and it had a kind of roof on top of it. This is Gigantia, which is built nearby, and this is a freestanding temple above the ground. And they're literally like a few hundred yards away from each other. But the Shara circle, you cannot go in it. It's got a big fence around it. You need to seek permission from the authorities and so on and so forth. But the most notable discoveries was that 200,000 human remains or body parts were found in around this particular area, which suggests it was a very important site. And there is some other sites in Gozo and Malta that date back to 4100 BC, so it could have been a much earlier culture than people realize. He just shows you some illustrations that were done in 1825 of what it looked like then before it got destroyed. And you can see the way it's underground here completely. And in the distance you have Gigantia. There's stone circles in Gambia and Senegal, or Senegambian stone circles, which are sort of across the border between these two countries. These are just interesting selection of stone circles. There are at least 1,000 of these that have been recorded. There are tumuli or mounds. They date to at least the 3rd century BC, so they're not that old. In total, there were 29,000 stones and 17,000 monuments. Like I said, 1,000 of these are the stone circles. And it's now been revered and protected by UNESCO. He just shows you a close-up of one of them. And there's a friend of mine, Eleanor Wilson, who set up a thing called Gambia out in this particular area. She works with the local king, of all people, and the princes of Gambia. And they protect these circles, and they've set up an eco-village there and take people out to look at them. So that is happening. And we are looking. I'm going to be going out there at some point this year. And hopefully we can take groups out there if people are interested enough to come and take a look, because you can spend weeks out there. There's so many sites. There's many areas that have not even been properly explored yet. It just shows you another example here. And the layout of some of these has been debated that they could represent different star constellations. And this was done by Anders Coolins back in 2007. And we have dolmens in the area and other roof structures. And yeah, it's just one of these places. It's just like there shouldn't really be stone circles there according to tradition, but there is, and they potentially go back to at least 2,500 years old. We even find examples in Peru. Now, this is debatable whether this was built as a stone circle or whether it was some other structure. But Silistani is a very interesting place. It's around the edge of Lake Titicaca. It's towards the Bolivia border. And you have these what are called chilpa towers. These are funerary towers, which are these beautiful designs here. You can see them here. They have this wonderful relief carvings on them. And there's lots of elongated skulls being found there. So whoever was building them had strange-looking heads. We know that at least. But these are wonderful towers. There's about 30 or more of these towers. Some of the blocks weigh 15, 20 tons. They're perfectly cut. They're polygonal. No one knows really who did this. It was certainly before the Inca. But at the site, we have these. We have a selection of stone circles that just happen to be there. Strangely, these kind of almost like come out of the kind of bluff there. And this is all that's left of them. So there could have been a larger structure involved here. There are other ones. If you head away from the main site, you can see one of the towers in the background there. You can see more of these circles. There's probably about 10 or maybe 9 in total, just scattered around this whole area of Silistani. And there are suggestions these could have been used as a solar calendar and even a lunar calendar, because the way the shadows form around them would have given accurate readings for different times of year to predict the seasons and when to plant crops. And it was a very important area for that, because if you don't plant the crops at the right time, you don't get any crops and they get frosted out and you'll die. And so they had to have some kind of calendar system in place, and it seems like they most certainly did. It just shows you from inside one of them, looking over the lake there. This is part of the greater Lake Titicaca complex. This is actually a different lake, but it's very close to it. This is Freddie Silver. He's going to be hopefully speaking here next year. He came with us on our tour there in 2014. He's actually a giant, and that is a massive stone circle. But you can just see the size of it here. They're not huge. This is one of the smaller ones, but they're kind of beautifully formed, and they're perfectly circular. And so it's just one of the anomalies we find down in Peru and heading over into Bolivia. Argentina has the Park of Menhirs. This is roughly circular. There's lots of different shapes and sizes here with beautiful kind of abstract carvings on some of them. This I would love to visit. This looks absolutely fascinating to me. But these are around 700 BC to 800 AD, which is an estimate. Seems quite a bad estimate, but it's that's what officially it is said. From the Tafi 1 culture, northwestern Argentina, and 141 of these monoliths, some that form into circles, have been found. It just shows you another example here. You can see the way some of them form circular patterns. Some look like kind of human figures or anamorph figures. This is like a guy with a hood on, so they could be representing the gods. Even in Australia, there are stone arrangements which are in a kind of circular fashion. This one's more of a plectrum shape, but this was found not too far from Melbourne, just southwest of Melbourne. I tried to go here. I couldn't find it, unfortunately, when I was in Australia a couple of years ago. But there's over 100 basalt boulders, and it's called Wurdi Yuang. and it was charted by archaeologists in 1977, but it was discovered by European settlers 2 centuries ago, basically. And then they realized when astroarchaeological work was being done on it, they realized it could indeed, if standing at this edge here, you get the summer solstice, the equinox, and the winter solstice sunrise, or the setting sun, at different times of the year. So it could have been used again, like we saw in Peru, as a calendar. This is another site. Now, this has been totally destroyed now. This is a site near Mullumbimby, near Byron Bay, which is Australia's Glastonbury, really. And I actually visited this site with Steve Strong and Evan Strong. And this is the artist's reconstruction of what it would have looked like. And it's almost like, not exactly stone circles. Well, they are stone circles, but they're quite small stones. But they form an avenue across this ridge and another stone circle on the other side. And this was recorded back in the late 1930s, 1940s. But it got completely bulldozed in 1940. And the guy who did it felt very, very guilty. He was a kid at the time, and his dad just told him to get rid of it to stop the government taking their land away because it was an archaeological site. So there's a lot of controversy about this, and fortunately I got some footage. There's really not much to see there, but on the site there's also this very large tumulus, and there's me, Steve, and this gentleman hanging about, and there's Evan Strong there. And you can check out the work on this at forgottenorigin.com. These are fantastic father and son researchers who live on the east coast of Australia. There's a lost stone circle. There's a couple of lost ones. This one caught my attention. In 1861, they were laying the foundations of a fishing port. When they saw taking shape beneath their shovels a mysterious spectacle, a broad circular arrangement of large rocks, strikingly symmetrical, evidently man-made. And then it got completely destroyed. You can just see this is just some other sites in the area which had absolutely nothing to do with the stone circle I just mentioned. But also in this area we find giant skeletons are being found as well. So there's some mysterious anomalies being found in Japan as we speak, very relatively recently, and more have been discovered. Even in New England, in North America, there are stone circles. This is one I've been trying to get to for years, but the owners of the land won't let me on, so I might have to sneak on next time. But this is in Heath, in Franklin County, Massachusetts. It's a blueberry field, and there's a crumbling arrangement of stones up there. He just shows you another angle on it here. There is an unconfirmed legend about the site that H.P. Lovecraft even wrote about it in his story, The Dunwich Horror. The opening chapter of the tale includes a reference to great rings of rough-hewn stone columns on the hilltops, more generally attributed to the Indians than the settlers. And this is in one of H.P. Lovecraft's works. So whether he was talking about this one, we don't know, but we know he was in this area when he was writing that book, and we have evidence of that. So he recorded that rather long time ago. So that's quite cool. And this is another stone circle, potentially, in New Hampshire, not too far from a site called America's Stonehenge. It used to be called Mystery Hill, which is a great complex of megaliths and chambers. This is near a place called Pelham. There's also a megalithic chamber nearby. Unfortunately, although it was recorded in the 1600s, so we know it wasn't the settlers who built it, it was probably the local Native Americans. It did get moved more recently because they were building in the area, but apparently the stones got replaced in the same way they were originally found, which was something like this. So it's kind of circle, more of a kind of plectrum shape again. But yeah, you can still go and visit this, and if you're ever in New England, I can give you the location of this, and you can just drive up and take a look. Obviously, there are recent stone circles, modern megalith builders. Some are in this hall today. Here's one, actually in Somerset. I completely and utterly forget where this is. We actually, myself and Sean, visit. Does anyone know what this is called and where it is? That's the one, yes, thank you. Which is not too far from me. And this is like a modern stone circle built just a few years ago, and it's a delightful spot. This is one that Sean Kerwin and John Martineau were involved with building back in 2006 at the Big Green Gathering site up on the Mendip Hills. And I believe it's still there. And interestingly, there's no signs there. And so it's just a stone circle in a field. So a lot of people keep thinking this is an ancient stone circle. But this is very intricate design, unique design, in fact. And this is the geometries that John and Sean worked on. This is it's very complicated, very interesting site. And again, this can still be visited now, I believe. I haven't been up there for a few years, but maybe we should pop up there. And if we just go to, this one just grabs me. This is the last slide, really, but this is part of my research for my Giants book. There was actually a stone circle recorded on Catalina Island, just off the coast of California, near Los Angeles. There's a whole bunch of islands there. Which we talk about in detail in the book. But back in the early 1600s, the Spaniards found what was formed by a large circle of long stones pointing upwards towards the midday sun at the center, which was the sun god, Idol. And so even back in the early 1600s, the Native Americans, whoever they were, appeared to be building megalithic stone circles even off the coast of California. And so we just find all over the world that this is clearly a phenomenon which has been around for over 10,000 years, and they're still being built today. So I hope you enjoyed that little survey around the world, and thank you very much for listening.